Oh, yes, Surrey Bob people. Okay, we're live. We're live. Hold on. Let me get the crown of the Keep Common vlog on. Oh, great. I'm going to have like stretched nipples for the rest of this video. How's everybody doing? I think it's been a week since the last live stream, and it might have been with Robert Barnes. Okay, I wanted to get more live streams in this week, but it's proving to be very difficult. By about 9:30 at night, I'm asleep, and I'm not asleep. I'm just like struggling to put kids to sleep. Okay, let me just see what I look like. Okay, not bad, not bad. Okay, it's not a pimple, people. It's just a disgusting. Look at it. We have to address the obvious before we can get into the live stream. It's a stab wound. I got stabbed in the head by a roadrunner. How's everybody doing? It has been a while. Let's see. We got okay, I'm gonna bring up some random comments before we bring in Robert Barnes. I want to see you do a countdown America news on Fridays. The fake news Fridays has been proving to be difficult because I don't want to just run a fake news Friday episode just to fill the fake news Friday. So it has to be like something worthy of it, but you know, the theme is out there. We'll see. I don't want to do it for the sake of doing it. It has to be something that requires insight into reading. If anybody notices Russian sex bots, please let me know. I will block them. If I think, let's see who the blue wrench is. Uncivil Law. If he comes in, he might be moderating. I have moderators. If the Russian sex bots come in and take over the chat, let me know. If I see someone taking over the chat through abuse of freedom of speech and not exercise of it, and you know what I mean, like, you know, posting letter after letter and whatever. We'll see. The sex bots need love too. Yeah, they need love. All right. Okay. Aaron Nuclear, which provides better ratio? Super Chat, member, or Patreon? How best to give money to your channel? That's a good question, actually. Super Chat, definitely no. Member, Super Chat and member, anything on YouTube is like a 70-30 split. Patreon's good. Subscribestar is good, except I haven't figured out how to withdraw anything from Subscribestar. Merch, whatever. It doesn't matter, really. YouTube takes 30% in general. Patreon takes 5%. Subscribestar, I think, takes 5%. You know, merch is merch and whatever. But thank you for asking. But it really doesn't matter. The best thing, share the channel with people who you think might get irritated about watching what we talk about. That's the biggest blessing. I'm going to do my best to do all the super chats. If I miss him, I apologize. I apologize flat out. Done. Okay. It's Robert Barnes is coming back on again. Robert Barnes, if you guys don't know him, he's not old enough to be my father compared to me, but he is so old in wisdom, I consider him to be my father of knowledge in the practice of law. We met. How did we meet? I don't even know how we met, but we met online on Twitter. That sounds very bad already. We met through Twitter. We did live streams together. Robert Barnes is agree with him, disagree with him, because you can disagree with his interpretation of facts, but you might have a harder time disagreeing with his knowledge of law. And that's where, you know, that's where the difficulty is when people want to assess, address, and in this day and age, demonize people that they disagree with. You can disagree with Robert's interpretation of stuff. His knowledge of law is amazing. I assume that nobody here has not heard of Robert Barnes, but just in the event that you're new to the channel, you don't know who Robert Barnes is, represented Ralph Nader, Wesley Snipes, Covington Kids. Let me see who else. AJ, the man whose name cannot be spoken on the social medias. He's amazing. He knows what he's talking about. He knows the law in an unapologetic sense. Like, you know, the law is the law, judge the lawyer, but you can't disagree with the law type thing. You can disagree with the law, but what it says is you can judge the lawyer. You cannot judge the lawyer in light of that lawyer's accurate, knowledgeable assessment of the law. Okay. Let's see this here. I like what I just saw here. Viscous shear. Attack the arguments, not the person making them. If only we did that, but Twitter is the exact opposite of that these days. In fact, social media, political discourse is the exact opposite of that these days. I have to say, this is the third smallest live stream I watch. It's usually one of my favorites. I learn almost as much here as I do watching Timcast. We're getting started. We're 5 minutes in. People have to flock in. People need to share the link, and that's it. But it's also not about the size of the audience. It's about the openness of the minds of the audience. That was beautiful, actually. Wayne Adams says, I finally understood the Flynn issue after 5 minutes into the last sessions with Robert Barnes. So clear and concise. Wayne, wait until we talk about the Barnes, because the Barnes is mind-blowing. We're going to start with Barnes. We're going to go to Arbery. We're going to go to Elon Musk, because that's magnificently beautiful. And then whatever else comes in, questions coming in, not just through super chats, just through questions, if we can get to them. Open the gyms. I'm losing my mind along with my gains. Do the 300 push-up challenge every day. Just 300 push-ups. Not, what do I know? I know nothing. I'm 158 pounds. Soaking wet. Twitter is poison. I missed that one, but yeah, Twitter is poison. Okay, so Barnes is here. We're going to talk. There have been some developments in Arbery. I also want to sort of address the Collinor. I watch him. I just don't know how to pronounce his name, and I know I've heard it many times. Collinor talking about his interpretation of the Georgia statutes, and I want Barnes to address it. I've screenshotted it, and we're going to talk about it. 90 knots, thank you very much. 220, it's coming tonight. Someone says I've gained, hold on, I lost it. I gained 7 pounds, despicably so. That avatar. Dear God. Can you ask Barnes if he had to hire a team of the highest powered or best lawyers, who he would hire? Okay, you know what? Let's bring him in. Barnes is here. We're going to start with, what did we say we're going to start with? We're going to start with Arbery, I think. Or we'll see what I said. I think I forgot now. Robert?
How are you?
I'm doing good, and yourself?
Good.
I'm manic as always, and a little bit more manic because I'm in the basement. I know my wife is upstairs with the 3 kids, and I can hear the noise through the floor, but I don't think the mic picks up on it. So it's going to be a fun one. I'm going to dodge parental responsibilities for the evening while we talk law. You're looking good now. Where are you? A fish tank. I noticed the fish tank.
Still in Texas.
Okay, awesome. Everything is good out there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just had a big rainstorm, but that's about it.
And no biblical flooding in Texas like we had in Michigan?
Some flood. They constantly say that there's a risk of flooding, but it usually hits just a few areas.
Okay, amazing. And I'm gonna bring up stuff while we talk. Adam Biggs, thank you very much. Robert, so the okay, hold on. Let's see. I want to bring up questions because I know people are gonna have a lot of questions, and maybe more than I have. You should have someone like Tim Pool on to talk about the optics and the court of public opinion in comparison to Barnes and the law. It's good. I mean, it's maybe one day if Tim Pool notices me, but I don't even care about that. I like not the pool, the public opinion. I like the law, and Robert knows the law unapologetically. So, Robert, in the Arbery case, there have been developments over the last week.
Yes. So, to that person's question, actually, there's a good Netflix documentary currently on trying cases in the press. I often say that knowing how to try a case in the court of public opinion in high-profile cases is as important as being able to try it in front of the court of the judge and the jury. And my own view is very skilled lawyers are actually much better at that than publicists, press people, and the rest. They have a certain instinct about how things work, but only the lawyer can control what gets filed in court and things of that nature. And lawyers tend to have more authoritative basis to speak about a case. So I think, well, for example, when I was representing Alex Jones, they came after me because I was having success in the court of public opinion, try to get me kicked out of the case based on my public statements. So Tim Pools does great work, but I think lawyers actually that are particularly skilled, and the trial in the media is a good example of that, about how the court of public opinion significantly impacts what happens. We have 2 classic examples of that right now, the General Flynn case and the Ahmaud Arbery case. Both of those are examples where what's happening in the court of public opinion is actually shaping what's happening in the court of law.
So, and it's an amazing thing, actually. And I hope if the comments are too distracting, someone let me know in the comment section. I'd like to bring them up while we talk. When we first did the Arbery video, we did it, I guess it's like a week ago, maybe a little bit more. And you said something that sort of stuck with me is, I would not have let the lawyer or the family or anybody run with a narrative that is going to be easily, not debunked, but is going to be easily discovered sooner than later. So I wouldn't let them run with the jogging through the streets narrative. I would go with the more honest approach of maybe doing something nefarious, but not something that requires or deserves or even can justify that level of escalation. And so how do you sort of reconcile that with the idea of fighting these things in the court of public opinion?
Yeah, so I think his family, now it depends on how you look at it. If his family's goal was to get immediate attention and get a GoFundMe set up that got a lot of money, then their approach made sense. If their goal was to get a certain outcome in the courts, their strategy, in my view, did not make sense. So their strategy may have been different. They may have looked at this and said, look, we're never going to recover monetarily from the city, county, state, or these defendants. So let's take the best version of possible events for our side, highlight that, and that will generate the biggest publicity, generate the biggest financial recovery in a GoFundMe account. If that was their objective, then they took the right strategy. My view was, if your goal was to actually get a conviction at trial, then pushing a narrative early and often that was unlikely to hold up as facts were developed was ill-advised. There's a natural tendency for people to want to go that path in court cases, to say, just let's assume all the best version of the facts are going to come out true. And my view is, you look at, okay, where are the facts likely to go? And then script a storyline based on those facts. Because what's come out, of course, since is he had multiple interactions with police. He had escaped frequently. But put it this way, here's how it can be interpreted. It can be interpreted that he had a long history of interaction with police, that it was often hostile and adverse, that he often tried to escape, that he often made misrepresentations about what was occurring. So in that context, scripting a narrative of, hey, he was just jogging through the neighborhood when some guys decided to come by and shoot him, was not a narrative that the facts would likely support at an actual trial. And so I thought, from that perspective, that was not a wise strategy to pursue to get a certain trial outcome. And I think that there's been more and more evidence of that. More and more videos have come out along those lines, that everybody pushing the jogging narrative, it becomes harder and harder when the evidence comes out to make that more likely than true from a trial perspective.
And so this is the issue, because it's not a question of pushback. It's just a question of being realistic. Yes, a lot of stories have come out in videos of him, police attempting to tase him, police attempting to confront him while he's listening to rap music, whatever, in a car or on a parking lot. All of that, to me, is unrelated to the incidents, and it doesn't affect my original assessment. It doesn't affect my current assessment, because it's not information that the individuals involved knew or had at the time, and even if they did, it probably wouldn't change anything. It changes the narrative. It changes the way people view it. It changes the arguments that they make publicly. But the bottom line is, okay, it's an interesting idea. I think you're right about it, is that strategically, the people who know better should know better, and they should not allow this narrative to run that they're not going to be able to support in the long run. The facts come out. What does it change at the end of the day? Call in Nora if you haven't seen the video. I think you've seen the video. He was saying his first video came out. He was operating on the basis of the news at the time, and I don't fault him, and there's no but. Operating on the news at the time that someone was jogging through a neighborhood, pulled over by two gun-wielding individuals, and shot. He posts a follow-up afterwards, which was more thorough and more in-depth. He's a lawyer. For anybody who doesn't watch him, it's a good video. It's insightful. Post the video, notwithstanding the initial inaccurate narrative that is no longer tenable, this doesn't fit the criteria that are required or justified or allowed for citizens arrest in the state of Georgia. So, concretely on the arguments of the citizens arrest, where everybody's reading the same statute and now reading it differently, how do you setting aside all the new information, how does the statute apply to the circumstances from the best information we have?
Well, I think you're going to have a lot of examples in this case of Scott Adams' principle of 2 films, 1 screen. So people are going to watch a lot of these videos and see different things. So based on their own, how they came to the case originally, what their life experience is, how they're filtering information. And I think that will impact a lot of how they portray that information. The second thing, so that's the sort of what I would call court of public opinion argument that's taking place. The court of law argument, I think where they're missing the boat a little bit, and maybe they're just trying to argue to the court of public opinion, which is different. But if they're arguing to the court of law or how they think the argument will shape, they're misfocused. There's been a lot of focus on, could Arbery have been convicted of a crime here? Could he have been convicted of criminal trespass? Could he have been convicted of burglary? But Arbery's not on trial anymore. So the question is not whether these individuals were right if they suspected he committed a crime. It's whether their opinions based on what they knew at the time was reasonable. So it shifts from an objective focus on Arbery's conduct, including facts they could not have known at the time, but we only know after the fact, to what was in their mind. What did they perceive? What did they understand? Because I didn't fully realize until recently that the pursuit in this case, they're now going to prosecute the guy who filmed it.
Yeah. So
this is what happens here. I mean, I'll give you my most controversial viewpoint. I have a lot of them. So and I'll counterbalance it with two different opinions. I'll say up front that my most controversial opinion about any court case ever has been my view that O.J. Simpson was innocent of the murders. I actually made a bet on it when I was a kid because you could bet on the verdict's outcome. So we can save that for another conversation. That's what I get my most.
I do have to know. Do you mean legally or actually innocent?
Both. I don't think it had anything to do with the murder. That's what I get most of my hate mail from. Whenever I'll just say that randomly just to see the reaction, and man, people get agitated. But I have my reasons, of course. The second component of it is, but from this context, I think that this is a lynching of the defendants. People forget that lynching's history, while it has a racial connotation in recent American history, it goes back to the Lynch brothers in Virginia, and they created the term, came from them because they wanted to go around and hang a bunch of redcoats. Then it spread to the West. That's where the term originated, named after them. Then it spread to the West, where it was common, it didn't matter who you were racially. It was just frontier justice, which initially frontier justice was like Western Virginia and Western North Carolina, just spread over time. But the mindset of lynching, I've tried to explain to people, is people just get inflamed with a perspective of a case where they have not had the time for deliberation or evidence. And people feel so enraged right now that it's leading a bunch of political actors to rush to judge these people when they cannot have all the evidence that they need to make that judgment. I think it was a rush to arrest. Now, I mean, the one guy made the mistake of talking. He cooperated, the guy that filmed it. And of course, he probably said something dumb in the course of those conversations. And that's what led. People think that if I sit down with a cop or federal law enforcement officer, they're so nice. They're just here to find the truth, by golly. And if I talk to them, it will never be used against me. It's not a trap. Well, just ask General Flynn how that turned out.
I thought you beat me to it. I was going to say Flynn is a good example of
exactly what happened to this third guy. Third guy is the same. So the way I look at it is I filter through what's the jury going to be asked in this case. And the jury is going to be asked, what I didn't realize is that they're all being charged with felony murder. So they're not being charged with traditional intentional homicide. Felony murder can carry the same consequence. It explained, because at first I was like, there's no way they're going to get an intentional homicide case when their own forensic team said they don't know how the gun went off, whether there was even a deliberate trigger pulled. Then when they saw felony murder, and it is a classic form of BS known as a bogus statute, in my view. I've never liked felony murder. It allows when you see some crazy case where somebody that was tangentially connected made one little mistake, suddenly served life in prison. It's because they were the lookout on something where somebody else did something bad that they had no idea about.
I got to stop you actually. What is the difference between felony murder, first-degree murder, second-degree murder?
The consequences are the same as first-degree murder, which never made sense to me. But here's how it works. So the consequences from a sentencing perspective are identical, but they yet don't have to prove the same thing. So intentional homicide, you have to prove they went up and shot the guy deliberately, intending that outcome. Whereas in reckless homicides, they created the circumstances by which they knew there was a high risk of that occurring. They're not apparently being charged with either of those. Felony murder is during the course of a felony, somebody dies. That's basically it. I mean, there's felony murder prosecutions where nobody did anything to cause the death, just because a death occurred. They're like, well, you committed a felony, somebody died, felony murder. And the left used to hate this crime. because of how often it's abused. Way too much prosecutorial discretion in it. I get the idea behind it. The idea is they want to protect life. They want to say, if you put something in motion that's inherently dangerous, you're going to be held responsible no matter what happens. But to me, we should separate. Felony murder should be considered like a negligent homicide, but it's not. It's treated like intentional homicide. So that's why the citizen's arrest issue is going to be huge, but people are looking at it from an objective test. So what they have to prove at trial is going to be that everybody involved, all three, the son, the father, and the third person filming it, were part of a felony in which a murder happened. Which they don't require them to prove they caused it. None of that. Just that a death happened while they were committing a felony. And the question then is, that's why the arrest issue is going to be critical, because the argument, there's a 1920 Georgia case where somebody got into a shooting match late at night on a bridge. They shot the guy because they thought he was the guy that there was a warrant out for. Turned out they got the wrong guy. And Georgia said, well, you created an emergency circumstance that led to a death, so you are now responsible for the murder of that person, even though they were shooting back, not started the shooting. So that's where the law comes from on this. So all they're going to it's all going to come down to, no longer is it going to be, how did he get shot? It's solely, were they committing a felony at the time he died? And that's it.
And I'm bringing up a comment which I take for granted is sort of tongue-in-cheek, but almost not ironic. I know in Canada, if you are threatening to assault someone and they run into traffic and get hit by a car, you can be charged with murder. So is this like someone has a heart attack during a bank robbery? You can be charged with felony murder.
You should look up some of the most abusive cases in the history of our country have been felony murder prosecutions. It's some of the craziest, the looniest facts that's possible. Yeah, really, exactly. See, I know I could get somebody really going on that.
You got me. I'm hiding it as best I can because I know what I think of O.J. Simpson, but I don't talk about it publicly. You and I will have this discussion privately, then maybe do an entire show on this.
Sure. Yeah, because this will definitely get people rolling. So whenever somebody says, do you have a contrarian opinion that would agitate me, well, just because I'm all over the place politically, that naturally happens. But that's the one that usually gets most people going. In this case, on Ahmaud Arbery, it will be a lot of my friends on the civil rights side and the African-American community that will strongly disagree with me. My brother-in-law is one of them who strongly disagrees with me. And it's been interesting engaging in a discussion with him about it. Through my sister, because I haven't discussed it with him directly yet. So because he's a smart guy, but he has a certain life experience that informs how he sees this, and I understand all that. But what the jury is now going to be asked is, what did they have reasonable suspicion of an escaping felon or not? And that will not be whether they objectively, in fact, should have had such an opinion. And that's my disagreement with the video, is he's really focused on, from an objective perspective, if he was a juror, would he convict Arbery of criminal trespass or a felony? I can see all the arguments as to why you would not. But that's not what's going to be the question for the jury. It's going to be whether or not these defendants had, what their subjective state of mind was. Did they have reasons to suspect him? And there's some objective components of that. So, for example, if it's completely unreasonable what you believe. I do a lot of good faith cases in the tax arena, and there it's all about, did you believe you were complying with the tax laws, even if it turned out your interpretation of the tax laws were wrong. This is true also in the defamation context. Even if you stated a false fact about someone, did you have reason to believe it was true at the time? Then that's a defense to defamation. You don't have what's called actual malice if the person is a public figure. So it's the same kind of approach. And since I do a lot of this, people often in all of those contexts confuse objective truth with subjective reality. How could Wesley Snipes believe he didn't have any obligation to file tax returns? Well, that's about his belief, for which objective reasonableness is a factor in determining whether you think he really believed it, but not its ultimate determination. It's ultimately, what did he believe and why did he believe it? And do you think that, and why only factors into whether he believed it? So the focus here will be whether they believed they had suspicion. And a fascinating piece last Sunday's New York Times, where they buried the lead about paragraph 83 in the story. They found that there had been over 86 911 calls in that precise neighborhood in just the 3 months prior to this incident about continuous crimes happening in the area. And then there's the 911 call referenced on the video that you mentioned, where that's a different person saying, we've had someone that fits this description constantly burglarizing our area. We've had a constant problem with it, as he puts it. So that's where a lot of people are focused on the temporal events. What did they? And some of this is a misinterpretation, in my view, of the statute. Phil DeFranco. I had a brief video on Phil DeFranco. It's still up at ban.video, but I put it up. I've been checking how YouTube censorship works and putting some of my videos from the American Countdown show up on my YouTube channel, which is real small, so it's not like a big thing. I just wanted to see how much YouTube's algorithm will take something off. Well, the title of the video was "Why Phil DeFranco was Wrong About the Law," and he got it badly. He mangled it totally. It took them all of 120 seconds to delete that video on YouTube. So leave Phil DeFranco out of the comment section of the title, as my advice. So the nature of the statute is, and I know Uncivil Law had an interpretation of it. A lot of people initially were combining the statute. It has two different provisions that only make sense if they're separate. It doesn't make sense if they're combined. So you can arrest someone for a misdemeanor if it's within your immediate knowledge, which, by the way, is very, very broad in Georgia, because as you can imagine, the political context in which that statute has been interpreted has almost been all security guard cases. So courts are anxious to protect security guards, not potential shoplifters. So, for example, most security guards make arrests that are not, they didn't witness the event. Someone else told them the information. The court has said, oh, that's fine too. Immediate knowledge can be very broad. So they've interpreted that broadly. And then the separate provision is you can also issue an arrest or make a citizen's arrest, in my interpretation of the statute, if you're an escaping felon. And all you have to have for that is reasonable suspicion that the person is so this whole case is going to turn on, did these defendants have a subjective belief that they had reasonable suspicion that Arbery had committed a crime because of the way they're choosing to prosecute it as a felony murder case. So the whole case is going to hinge on that fact. And for that, it's all the information they had. So, for example, if they thought, like the guy who called into the 911 call, that this was the person who had previously committed felons in the area and was now escaping being caught by the police because of his reaction to the person he saw making a 911 call, then that would be evidence of reasonable suspicion they get to introduce. In addition, all those other videos may come into play if the father had seen him. The father was a longtime law enforcement officer, had dealt with Arbery in a prior case, apparently was the lead investigator on that case, a case where now that they're releasing some of the evidence from that, this is what I meant by trying to portray him as just a nice jogger who just happened, like he was Obama's kid, to use the Trayvon Martin example that Obama made the mistake of doing. That because the facts were never going to hold up there either for that same reason. In that context, that shows that he gets caught with a group of people who stole. Apparently, I'll give him credit to steal a 65-inch TV from a store and somehow get out of the store with that thing. So I understand people and then don't compliment burglars and whatnot. I kind of have a sympathy for him, but at a minimum, that's skill. I mean that's talent. But the way he defended himself, according to the police reports that are now coming out, and the whole police department's basically being put under scrutiny down there. That's a mistake politically, because now they're going to start to push back heavy. So everybody who's got intel and information about Arbery is going to be leaking it, is going to be providing it to the defense and the rest. But putting the whole police department, I thought, was a mistake. But that's basically what they did. They put all the prosecutors on trial. They put all the local people on trial. That tends to backfire. But from a political perspective and from an ultimate court perspective, because of where evidence will now flourish. But there he totally denied it. He, according to the police reports. Now that's going to be the police reports version of events. We don't have Arbery's because he's no longer with us. He's dead. But maybe some of the other people that were with Arbery that day may have favorable testimony. We'll see. But they may not want to stick their head up in the middle of all this. But according to that police report, he misled, misrepresented, dodged, tried to hide the evidence, tried to lie about it, tried to make it look like the cops were behaving badly. So there is a pattern that is emerging that at least the defense can present as an interpretation of that evidence, that Arbery was constantly fleeing, constantly escaping, constantly hiding, constantly lying, constantly committing crime. When confronted, he either tried to escape or do something dramatic in response to it. So if the father had that intel and had that information, then that's evidence that he can attest to. So that's where all this may come in. But the real question is, did these defendants have reasonable suspicion that Arbery had committed a felony? Because they do have him as, I think, a reasonable interpretation. Well, put it this way. It's reasonable for them to say he was escaping. based on the course of conduct. The other thing that I forgot his last, is it Colin? Is that the name of the video?
Colin Noor.
Colin Noor. And when I watched that video, what stood out to me, and one thing I encourage people to do is change Arbery's race. Make him a white guy, redneck with a mullet. Do you have the same interpretation of events? It's hard for people to do, but I used to do this with the OJ case. I used to take the facts of the OJ case. I talked to somebody randomly on the plane and give them same facts as what I understood as OJ, but I would change it from OJ, change it from LA. And I would often get people say, oh yeah, that guy's probably innocent. And I was like, that's fascinating. If I just put the word OJ in there, they would have thought I was nuts and asked for more alcohol. So so given that sort of dynamic, I think the same thing is here. They're going to have, I think they're going to have a strong defense that they had reasonable suspicion of a pattern of behavior, especially if the father does not have a history of abusive conduct. Because what I always look for in these cases is if you have a bad cop, if you have somebody that's been doing this kind of thing forever, going too far repeatedly, then that's going to frame a different story framework. But if they don't, and the reason why I don't think they do, this was the number one thing I looked at in Michael Brown, same thing in Zimmerman, same thing in Tamir Rice. If the cop has a bad history, that frames the case differently, that this cop has a history of being overly aggressive. If they don't, that suggests that something was unique about that circumstance, and that the cop's intent was probably cleaner, maybe wrong, but cleaner. And the fact that we've heard nothing about a single complaint ever being filed against him, which by this point you could almost guarantee would have been leaked, tells me that they don't have that angle.
The only thing I heard in the news was that the father was denied his accreditation for policing, whatever, because he didn't pass some test or something. But But is that, well, I'll get to actually one of the points in a second, because it was one of the top, it was the the top comment on Colin Noor's video. But before I do that, I just want to get through these because I want to read these. Robert, please give us one example of something you enjoyed while in Madison, Wisconsin. Go Bucky.
There's a lot. The beautiful lakes. I lived in a home that was designed by one of the great architects when I was there. Probably my favorite thing was by the field house and the lake. There's a big place right next to the lake where all the students get together on a huge outdoor patio, and they have great beer. I made the mistake of trying to outdrink some of those Germans up there. Bad idea. But I do love the beer and the lakes.
And we got BB. Thank you very much for the super chats. These vlogs are great. Love you, Viva and Robert, and OJ is, and I think we know where he's going with that.
Not guilty.
Yeah. So uncivil losses. I screwed up reading the first send into the second send. Okay, I don't know what I'm reading.
Second sentence. Yeah.
In the citation arrest statute. Still, so many questions remain. There's no question about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the mistake that was made is very commonplace. It's the statute could have been written a lot better, but it is Georgia.
Okay, and I'm gonna not pull up the statute. We're gonna talk about it in a second because it's gonna get to Colin's comment. Georgia Supreme Court says the citizen's arrest must be based on probable cause. They also say the Fourth Amendment requires it.
If for it to hold up in court, yes. So,
okay.
But that's where my understanding is for criminal defense purposes of these guys, they just have to prove that they thought they had reasonable suspicion. What Nate's pointing out is that if they'd actually arrested him, the arrest could have been thrown out in court as them lacking probable cause. So there may be an argument about the father, whether what he knew and didn't know, what he understood or did not understand in terms of that statute. But my understanding from the statute and from the court, there haven't been many criminal cases prosecuted of people doing wrongful citizen's arrest outside of the security guard context. And like I said, there the courts have found very liberal interpretations. But he's right about what could have actually happened to Arbery. Could they have actually arrested him in ways that the court could have said the arrest was legit? So where that normally impacts things is not so much the arrest, but if you find something, a search, usually the way that what Nate's talking about is that usually would be adjudicated in the context of a search as part of an arrest. And if it turns out they did not have probable cause, then the Fourth Amendment requires that evidence be suppressed because they didn't have probable cause to do the arrest. That means they didn't have probable cause to do the search. So any evidence. So that's usually where it comes up in that context. Somebody does a citizen's arrest. They find drugs on the guy. They says, oh, he actually didn't have probable cause, because that's a totally separate constitutional analysis. Mm-hmm. I assume from a criminal defense perspective on reasonable, that the Fourth Amendment would not apply to their ability to mount a criminal defense based on the lower standard of reasonable suspicion from the statute, because there would probably be due process issues with reinterpreting that statute more broadly to conform to Fourth Amendment standards.
Okay, that's phenomenally. It's fascinating, actually. Okay, and now Joshua Cornelius. Josh, I hope everything is doing well. Josh is a trucker doing cross-country trucking. He says, would have involuntary manslaughter been a more appropriate charge in that it be more likely to result in a jury conviction? They can still get them on involuntary manslaughter based on the lesser and included charge in murder, correct?
They can, but it's not clear they're going to bring that charge. So prosecutors so the defense sometimes can ask for that, but if the prosecutor doesn't charge it, the defense may choose. My guess is that they're not going to give them that choice. This is what happens in the court of public opinion. They want these guys, like I said, I'd call it lynching. People can use whatever phrase they want. They want these guys convicted, put it that way. But they want them convicted of something serious. They wanted to make it look dramatic. This has now become, they brought in a prosecutor from Atlanta. So this is so politicized now. And particularly once they brought in a prosecutor from Atlanta, where it's Atlanta's where this story is really hot, their political interest is going to be to secure a massive conviction. Involuntary homicide won't give them that. So what is likely to happen is the prosecutor will not charge it, force the jury to make an all or nothing decision on a higher charge. And if you're the defense, you may want to gamble on that. You can ask for a lesser included. And I don't know what Georgia law is about how much it requires it if the defense requests it. But the defense may be willing to take the same gamble. So we'll see how that unfolds.
Interesting. And then L. Hurst says, Barnes, will you provide your argument to the defense pro bono? I assume they might see this video and they will deduce that information which they deem to be appropriate.
I think the defendants have been denied bail to date. So
they're in jail is basically
yeah. So it'll be their lawyers, but they hired some very skilled local defense lawyers that know the community well. So we'll see how well they handle it. I mean, Zimmerman hired very good counsel. In fact, he was a guy that came from the left. That's what made me pay attention to the case. I just originally assumed that the Martin story was a version of the events was accurate until I heard him talk, and I knew of him from other cases. And he was like, by the way, if any honest lawyer looks at this, they would conclude that this case never would have been prosecuted except for the publicity attendant to it. So I think I think it's going to be felony murder or nothing is probably what the jury's going to face here.
Okay, very interesting. Now, Joel Rowley says, New Mexico Sheriff Police beef. Never get my chats read. Sorry, but I'm not sure what you're talking about right now. This story, I don't know. The New Mexico Sheriff Police beef.
I don't know what the full scale is. I do know that Gallup, New Mexico, from stories that I've been sent, is apparently under some form of shutdown, like the National Guard's on the street or something. So that's what I've been told by people that live there. And I know that issue in New Mexico. I know that there's also an issue with the governor issuing shutdown orders, because New Mexico is one of those states where you have two big population centers that are very democratic, and then a rural population that's very different politically. Some of it's a sort of rural conservative population, and some of it's a very different, it's old Mexican. So it's a Mexican population that has been there since the 1700s. So their politics are very different than, say, West Texas, and definitely than than East LA. So so it wouldn't surprise me if some of the rural county sheriffs have no interest in enforcing the governor's order, or local police do, and the state does. This is happening all over the country. There's sheriffs and police that are refusing to enforce orders. So the governors are bringing in other police organizations to do it, like, say, the sheriffs instead of the county sheriffs, instead of the city police, or the version of whatever the state police is versus the local police. I don't know if that's what's happening, but it wouldn't surprise me, particularly in a place like New Mexico.
Okay. And now, sorry if I missed the chat, Joel, but I'm doing my best, and I want to sort of try to keep it on theme for the time being. Now, I'm going to read the Georgia statute because Colin Noor, I should bring it up, but I can't. I don't want to take a chance bringing it up. The statute for, I believe it's trespass. Yeah, here we go. A person commits the offense of criminal trespass when he or she intentionally damages any property without consent of the owner, blah, blah, blah. A person commits the offense of criminal trespass when he or she knowingly and without authority enters upon the land or premises of another person or into any part of any vehicle, railroad, car, craft, blah, blah, for an unlawful purpose. So this is where I want to address something for everybody, because I don't know the answer. Entering, so a lot of people, I know in Canada, breaking and entering doesn't require breaking. So you can enter an open area and it's still breaking and entering. A lot of people are saying it's an open construction area, no doors, so there was no unlawful entering. Do you want to clarify that, or is that right? Is that wrong? Is that inaccurate, accurate?
Yeah, I would look at it from two different perspectives. Whether or not there's one is whether or not anyone had reasonable suspicion that was occurring. And that's separate from whether or not, in fact, he did commit a crime if we were in front of a jury. I think the evidence that he committed a crime from the videotape we have seen is definitely in doubt. Because what's not been clear is, was there a no trespass sign? Did he know not to be there?
Okay, let me stop you there. Does there need to be a no trespass sign on private property?
There's an interpretation that well, put it this way. If there is a no trespass sign, it's open and shut.
Okay.
If there isn't, then it becomes a subjective interpretation question. So my own view is, I understand that people saying, hey, I too wander in places. I've started to ask people more and more, is like, well, tell me the last time you were walking through a neighborhood and you walked into someone's home because the inside of the home was under construction. And very few of them have answers other than like realtor types. And so it's like, I don't recall that being very common. As Tim Pool pointed out, he was like, in Chicago, you'd get shot if you did that. And it's one of my arguments with many of my African-American friends on the civil rights side is, what would Shaft have done? Instead of what would Jesus have done, what would Shaft have done? If Shaft was across the street and he thought someone was coming out who had stolen his gun from his house before, Shaft just might have shot him before he even got down the street. He might not have chased him. He just might have shot him. So when people tell me, hey, I've never heard of this kind of cultural mindset of trying to capture someone or trying to take personal law into your own hands, Shaft is one of the most popular cultural figures in the African-American community for a reason. In the most recent Shaft movie, the girl becomes more attracted to Shaft's, the third generation of Shaft, after he shoots people. So it's like, I have a lot of friends in many parts of the world, and I know a lot of people who would react that way. Maybe they shouldn't. I wouldn't. But I have an unusual viewpoint on property. So so I think that in that context, did he commit criminal trespass? I think there's good arguments he did not. But I do think there's reasonable suspicion, or put it this way, I think there's a good argument for the defense that they could have reasonable suspicion because someone else separate from them was calling 911 at the time. And here's the things that if I was arguing against Arbery, or if I was arguing about why that person thought it was criminal trespass, well, he said there's been a history of, he thinks this person going into that property at night. He thinks that there's been robberies and he believes this person is the responsible party. And if you slow-mo that tape, that was part of the tape they have chosen not to slow-mo. They've chosen to actually speed up. Watch how Arbery enters the property. Arbery isn't looking at it as, hey, geez, that looks interesting. He stops, turns around, and looks to see if anybody is watching him before he walks in.
But I'll stop you there. Let's just assume that, as my thought process has been from the beginning, let's just assume he was committing a crime, trespass, whatever.
Yep.
In order for the citizen's arrest to be justified, they would have had to have known what we are now watching on video camera. So that's
the part I'm not sure of. In other words, because here's my take on that. In other words, let's assume that their evidence is that they believe someone who fits Arbery's description had been robbing from the neighborhood.
And if I may stop you there, Arbery's description was a black male in a white shirt. So not narrow it down.
Not that description, but a more detailed description because there was someone who is young, fits a certain height, fits a certain weight. In other words, the way I would compare it is look at police reports of evidence of how they describe someone. And it's usually just race, height, gender, clothes. So from that perspective, but here they have more. So part one is someone of Arbery's description they believe has been robbing the neighborhood. Let's assume that's what they'll say is their evidence. Second, they see someone across the street on the phone, and let's say they believe that person's on the phone to 911, maybe even says something to Arbery. Third, they see Arbery suddenly go from still to running. So, and if the father did recognize him, which maybe his testimony at trial, that it was someone that he knew had a prior criminal history, prior theft history, et cetera. And let's say he recognized him, because what was interesting to me about that 911 call discussed on the tape, or discussed on the video you mentioned, is the person says he's seen him on video. That tells me that video had been shared with multiple people in the neighborhoods. So if they're saying that guy looks just like the guy on the video. Now you could argue about how descriptive it is, but from a regular cop perspective, I would say that would even suffice for probable cause. If let's say that's an actual police officer in a police car, he sees a guy running when someone's making a 911 call. He fits the description and looks a lot like the person he's already seen on the video as someone who is illegally entering that property for, they believe, theft before. There's been more than 80 phone 911 calls about thefts in the neighborhood. Was it unreasonable for them to suspect him of having committed a felony, either then or in the past?
So let me stop you there. Is the criteria, was their personal belief unreasonable, or rather was their personal belief reasonable? Because those are two different legal.
Yes, it's solely whether or not they had reasonable suspicion in their subjective mindset.
So then the legal measure is not going to be whether or not their interpretation of events was unreasonable, but rather or not was it reasonable. So
in essence, yes, and it's not objectively reasonable. Just
the
way I think of it is, what were their reasons? Did they have reasons to suspect him? And do I believe that those were that they actually believe that?
Okay.
And that's why I say a lot of people are focusing on a difference, because they're really trying to do a moral narrative of what they're really saying is whatever he was doing, he didn't deserve to die. That's a moral truth, but that's separate from whether or not these people are legally guilty of felony murder, which is a separate analysis.
And we're going to get to it in 1 second, because I want to read the comment from Colin Noir's video. But didn't they say they just wanted to talk to him? A consensual convo happens prior to detainment or arrest. Wouldn't that negate false imprisonment? Let me add to that. My own.
Yeah.
When someone says they just want to talk and they have a shotgun, not necessarily pointed at you, because we'll have a disagreement as to whether or not it's pointed at. They have it in hand ready. It's not just. It's sort of like we just want to talk, a la Harold and Kumar Escape Guantanamo Bay type thing. So, if anybody's never seen that movie, it's one of the funniest movies ever made. So when someone says we just want to talk, but they have a shotgun in their hands, the question is it we would just want to talk, or is it you're in fear for your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely from Arbery's perspective, I understand why he did what he did. It becomes a question of the first analysis will be whether or not they were committing a felony in terms of citizen's arrest, because if they have reason, because then they're fine. Everything they do after that is not a felony. But there's actually, I think, a second question about whether what they did constitutes, going to that person's question, felonious false imprisonment. And even if they didn't have a citizen's arrest. And there it goes into, was he, like, for example, if this was a police setting, they would say he was not detained, probably. So let's say there was cops in front of him, cops behind him, but he could run in multiple directions and no gun yet was pointed at him, and no one's saying yet he's under arrest. I mean, there have been scenarios, I think some of these interpretations are dubious, but there have been scenarios where someone's stuck in a car or truck with the armed FBI agent demanding they answer questions. And they've said, oh, that's not custodial. That person wasn't under arrest. So the same standards will likely apply in the false imprisonment context, because it'd be very hard for the courts to come up with one standard of arrest that's different than false imprisonment. People would be like, that just seems like a politically hypocritical sequence of judgments. So that's where they will have a second argument along that person saying that they at least did not intend to falsely imprison him. In other words, he may have perceived he was imprisoned, he was detained, his restriction of movement, but that they did not intend so. And because you're going to have these multiple level intent questions. One, did they have reasonable suspicion? If they answer no, next question, did they intend to imprison him at the time in which it has to be felony false imprisonment, because felony murder, there's no such thing as misdemeanor murder. So it's got to be felonious false imprisonment. So that means they have to have intended to have prevented his movement. And they're going to have at least some arguments, because mostly there's no video evidence they ever pointed the gun at him. And so that would be the argument that he's running around and they're still not pulling the gun. And so that will be their argument of, he could have just kept running. We wanted to talk to him and we were brandishing the gun for our defense because we thought he was armed. But we'd never brandished it at him to actually detain him. We never physically grabbed him or pulled him down. And at least I would say, if this was a police context case, they would say he wasn't detained. So it's going to be interesting whether, and again, this is all going to be, do you believe beyond a reasonable doubt that these three people were intending to falsely imprison him? And that will be a second intent question in the case.
Okay, that's amazing, and I want to get to the video recorder getting charged with felony murder, but mandatory carry. I'll come back after work. Enjoy work. Unless your job is a commercial fisherman pulling out 1,000-pound tuna from the ocean, I would imagine not many people enjoy their work or enjoy work that much. How do you suggest you interact with people to have discussions, not in terms of right or wrong, agree, disagree, but how the system is, facts? don't do it over alcohol and don't do it over Christmas. Those are my that would be my my recommendation. And thank you very much for the super chat, Courtney. I'd say this is a philosophical discussion and not necessarily one that we can have right now. I see one of my kids has been texting me from my wife's phone, which is going to be funny. Okay, I want to read the top comment from Colin Noir's video because I think it is going to illustrate the fundamental difference in this discussion being a legal discussion, a moral discussion. The comment on Colin Noir's video is, first rule of being a responsible gun owner: don't get involved in third-party altercations. You don't know the whole story. Mind your own business. Look at what happened. One guy dead, 2 guys going to jail for a long time. What was the reward for this great? Oh, son of a bee sting. I didn't get the full thing. For this great risk. So, I mean, that is my ultimate underlying philosophy. I appreciate the Georgia citizens arrest laws are surprising to a Canadian, like almost eye-opening to a Canadian. But that is my underlying philosophy in all this: is was it all worth it? And I get flack from I don't know what side. I don't think it's a political flack. I just think it's flack. And people say, well, so you just let people steal things? No, but I don't necessarily think that it should escalate to death for theft or suspected felony trespass. I don't care if it was felony trespass. You know, my philosophy is call the cops, let them deal with it, take a picture with your phone, and then you know, everybody goes home to their families. It's not like the McMichaels didn't want to go home to their families either, and they're going to have problems now. So that's my philosophy. But the question then is, you're making principles of law out of all of this. I don't know what the question was anymore. I mean, the idea is even if they're justified, lives are ruined.
Yeah. I mean, I think down deep, it's people who what they're really saying is the citizens arrest law shouldn't exist, because I try to play out with people. Now, what's interesting is the same friends and family that think that these guys should get the max. I've asked them in many contexts. Many of them are people that are, you know, big gun rights people. And I've asked them, particularly in the African-American community, what would you do if someone you saw was burglary? And there's several of them, the same people that believe these guys should get the max, say, I would have shot the guy on the site. So that's why it's like, okay, like when that earlier super chat question about how to deal with these issues, the way I often do is I just change the facts, I always say that reason is never the master of motivation. Motivation is the master of reasoning. So if you want to reason better, change your motivation. We as lawyers are trained to do that. Not everybody does it as well as others, but that's what we're trained to do. So to step in the other side's shoes, to paraphrase my favorite quote from Elvis, he always said his father taught him when he was 5, never judge a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes. And that's why I'm hesitant to judge Arbery. I'm also hesitant to judge the people accused of being responsible for his death. Trying to look at it from both perspectives. And I'm actually sympathetic to both sides, which seems odd, but that's the nature of it.
Well, you walk the middle, you get hit from traffic from both sides, so you'll get that. Okay, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's phenomenal. I don't think anybody who has established their opinion is going to change it at this point, and unless some radically earth-shattering facts come out. But you know, the more and I have these discussions with family members and friends, the more previous videos that come out doesn't change anything. It just changes the narrative that's going to be sold to the public. The dude could have had a rap sheet 10 miles long. It's that day, it's that moment, and it's what they knew. Mm-hmm. That's going to determine things. Yep. Speaking of, let's talk injustices and like segue into Michael Flynn, because I know I got questions. I think I would trust you to give the good answers to those questions. Hold on a second. Carl Schneider says, this is earmarked for the Viva Fry Forward Plastic Surgery Fund. Look at that thing. It's crazy. And I turn sideways. It casts its own shadow. This is how big it is. It's going to leave a scar, but my face has never been my claim to fame. Okay, so how is Arbery escaping? So, okay, let's get this. Uncivilized asking, before we go into the Flynn, because we want to know about Flynn also, how was Arbery escaping in Georgia 16th and controlling? If so, hard to see how it is plausibly applies to these facts would defeat the citizens arrest claim.
So I presume that their defense is going to be, and I think there's some statements in the police record to date, that like the father at least was standing outside, sees his neighbor calling and looking at someone who's outside the house, and he believes that person is, he's probably, let's assume this is his testimony. He sees, they're calling 911. We've caught him. This guy that's been through this neighborhood repeatedly. Remember, the son actually had a 911 interaction with someone who, at least they're probably going to say they believe was Arbery. Before, at that same house, he saw him, called 911. Arbery took off. They never caught him. So wow, we've caught him. And then he sees him. I think his exact phrase was that he saw him hauling ass. And that he interpreted that as, okay, he's fleeing. They just caught him. That guy's calling 911. He's fleeing. We're going to make sure he doesn't get away this time. So I assume that's going to be his testimony. So I understand the criticism of the degree to which they had evidence in their own personal witnessing it that did not show that he was an escaping felon. But the question will be whether he believed, based on what he was seeing, a combination of what he was seeing, whether that constituted. I can say from a Fourth Amendment perspective, if he was a cop, every judge would have said that was absolutely sufficient.
Yeah, if he's a cop and anybody's trying to wrestle the gun out of the hands of a cop, only because you can assume the cop is not going to kill you in the streets when approaching you, just they want to talk.
Unless you're in Chicago.
Well, no comment. I haven't been to Chicago in a few years, but I think this is going to start a discussion on the laws. It's going to start a discussion on the raison d'être behind the laws.
Yes.
Tragedy always creates the discussion. I don't care what anybody says. When somebody's dead, even under these circumstances, regardless of what his history was, it's a tragedy. It's a loss of life. Lives are ruined. Regardless of whose side you're on, lives are ruined, regardless. And
the question really becomes almost an empirical one to some degree. Does this increase risk of unnecessary harm and death or decrease it, the citizens arrest law?
I think people are going to appreciate that maybe having, despite all their best intentions, maybe having 3 people on their phones, like calling neighbors, in not inflicting justice, but rather imposing justice, it might not be the best way to do it. Maybe people are like, next time, call the cops and go home. Take a picture and go home.
Yep.
Okay, Sullivan. Okay, everybody knows what's going on in Flynn. Flynn, I still believe I get partisan attacks on Flynn because I will unequivocally, despite my political orientation, say that Flynn was done dirty. I'll say it in every video I got. Yeah. And I have not watched Legal Eagle's 42-minute video on the subject, but I have people telling me that I'm a partisan hack and everyone needs to go watch his video. I don't care. Terrible.
Have you ever heard of Legal Eagle in terms of the real legal world outside of his YouTube stuff?
No,
I find his opinions about a first-year law student would do better legal analysis than Legal Eagle. I have zero respect for the guy.
My only claim to fame, or my only issue is I'm a Canadian dude learning impeachment law. One can go back to our videos because you can't undo what's been done on the internet and assess assessments and rational and what's the word I'm looking for? Not discretion, but rather thought process in light of what we've published, because I don't delete my wrong videos. Mm-hmm. So
Legal Eagle, it's my rule about projection. I tell people a lot is if you hear an accusation that sounds like totally off the wall in who it's describing, that the person is often confessing through accusation. People have this deep need to confess by accusation. It's fascinating. I learned this many years ago, and it turned out it was incredibly predictable. I could know exactly what someone was up to by what they were accusing someone else of. And partisan hack is a great description for Legal Eagle. Just go back and listen to that, where he cries halfway through reviewing Schiff's speech to the Senate. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't take you seriously anymore.
Forget that. It was the whole business about hearsay being as admissible evidence as direct evidence. I mean, I don't have to be an American lawyer to know that that's a spin. That's a spin on a fact.
I've just never heard of him in the real legal world. So it's like, I get YouTube loves him and YouTube loves to promote him. I would tell people, if you want a bad legal education, Legal Eagle is a good place to go.
The projection thing you just said is the best thing ever, because I was literally, if the person I had this discussion with is watching, I said, making accusations of me, you have to read these because they are more true of yourself than of me. And if you're not familiar with projection as a psychological principle, you're deceiving yourself, but not me. Hold on a second. Someone says, thanks for the shout out the other day, made my day, Mandy Amos. No, you have to have changed your name. When I said in the Flynn video, I said Mandamus, and unless your name is Mandy Amos, Mandy, I believe you have to. I'm going to go check the history to see if that's your real name. Either way, hilarious and amazing. Okay, so everyone knows what happened in Flynn. Railroaded by the FBI, tricked into giving an interview. From that one interview, after 4 months of investigation, finding no derogatory information, they then get him to plead guilty to 1 count of lying to the FBI on a non-material fact of the investigation, incidental to any investigation about Russia, yada, yada, yada. Everybody knows it. If you don't know it, go watch the videos. Sullivan, who refuses to grant I'm seeing the government, but is it the Department of Justice's motion to dismiss?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I can use Department of Justice, government interchangeably. He refuses to grant it, makes an open invitation to amicus curiae, outside people to come in and make motions to oppose the motion to dismiss by the government. Self-appoints Gleason. I don't know who the person is, but I know who they are now. To oppose the motion, Flynn's attorneys make an emergency mandamus petition to the Court of Appeals because they can't. Mandamus is to order a public official to render a decision that they are required to render based on their position. You can't make that to the judge who's not making it, so they make it to the Court of Appeals to say, order this judge who's a public official to render the decision he's required to render. The Court of Appeals gives him 10 days to answer. Am I right? And am I relatively accurate in my assessment that the Court of Appeals is saying you've got 10 days to save your ass or we're going to spank it type thing?
Yeah, I mean, typically what happens in a writ of, you don't often have a lot of writ of mandamuses that are like, even though they're often against the judge, the judge isn't the real party in action. So like in discovery disputes in California, for example, your only remedy often is a writ of mandamus. And really you're just asking it's really the opposing party. What's unique here is that both parties are in agreement. So you have a judge doing something. And so this occasionally comes up, but very rare. And so a typical response to a writ request is to ignore it. Most courts appeals just don't want to get involved because they think they can fix the problem on appeal. They can fix the problem on a formal appeal that has the whole record. So they got a good panel. That was the key for Flynn. They got a panel. There's one Obama judge on it, but the other two are not. One's a longtime old school Republican, and the other one's a Trump appointee. And so that's why, and particularly it's probably the long old school judge, conservative judge that grabbed the case and issued it. He's probably the lead judge on the panel by seniority. And so it was very unusual. I'll give Sidney Powell a shout out. She did a fantastic job in drafting the writ. Molly McCann does her work as an associate. They're a small team. I mean, they're smaller than my team. So they're a real boutique firm in truth. And they put together an excellent writ request that pointed out all of the problems with this. And they did a smart job of putting the political context in it, going back to that very first question about how you use the court of public opinion to influence the court of law. And they cited Dershowitz's article, the Turley's article. They pointed out that a bunch of legal, well-respected law people on the left think this is nuts, what the judge did, and that it's high profile. So they're telling the Court of Appeals, other judges are going to go nuts unless you do something about this. And that's why it was so significant. I'd say high chance the writ's going to be granted.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not even like I didn't know about it until I read about it in the Forbes article with the Sentening versus the U.S., which was rendered a week before. So assume Sullivan doesn't have a clerk. Assume give him the benefit of the doubt, and I'll eat poop for suggesting it. Assume he didn't know about the decision that was rendered by the Supreme Court a week earlier. He knows about it now. So they're basically saying, get your stuff in order before you defy a Supreme Court decision, or we're going to come down on you.
And that's half of it. The other half of it was a fact I did not even know. It turns out the local D.C. courts do not have a local criminal rule, nor do the federal rules, of course. I knew that part, but I didn't realize the local court also had no federal rule to allow amicus in criminal cases at the district court level.
Okay.
And so she hammered this point. And she was like, look, the only reason why, and what was really impressive, was Judge Sullivan had previously cited that very fact for arguing why he could not allow amicus in cases. So he looks like, I'll give you everybody a little secret about Judge Sullivan that I've been keeping quiet for a long time because there was a chance I was going to represent General Flynn in front of him. And it's that Judge Sullivan is known as being as dumb as a bale of bricks. So that there's no other way to put it. The guy is not bright. So it does, put it this way, it does not surprise me that Sullivan would contradict his own orders. I have had a strong suspicion, other people that have been in front of him and watched him, that his clerks have a huge influence on a lot of his written opinions. And that's why he made the mistake of saying, oh, I think General Flynn's guilty of treason. And it's like treason has no application here at all. It couldn't.
Something that was not crafted by the clerk.
I actually roped in a judge this way in Ohio many years ago. Very sophisticated judge, but not real bright on the rules of evidence and the law. He had hired all Harvard law clerks. He thought that Obama was going to put him on the Supreme Court. And I figured out midway through that the marshal had messed up, had contaminated my case with the jury. Stuff that's not supposed to happen, but was clearly had already happened. And I realized my clients were really going to get lynched in live time. So I decided what I would do is make a bunch of evidentiary objections, but I would not file any briefs about them. I would only make them live in court, knowing the judge would make about 50 mistakes. And he did. I then moved for a mistrial. He figured out how I trapped him, and he forced the prosecutor through behind-the-scenes conversations to basically give my clients a sweetheart deal. That was incredibly generous. It was 10 times, literally 10 times more generous than what it was before trial, and they're about to win at trial. So Sullivan is of the similar. I have a strong hunch that he's of the similar streak. And that would explain these contradictory rulings.
Well, just so everyone appreciates the legal beauty of what you just said is when you make an argument in court and you don't want to submit written argumentation or written briefs, it forces the judge on the spot without the benefit of doing their own research through their own clerks or whoever to render a decision on the spot. And you can sort of exploit their understanding or lack thereof to make them cause them to render a decision which would be untenable upon further research on the spot if they don't know their stuff.
Exactly. Okay. So it strips them of protection from their clerks. And that's what I've done that on multiple occasions. A major problem with federal courts in America is the clerks are overwhelmed. They're these SJW type liberals who don't even believe in old constitutional principles. They believe the outcomes justify. They're not your classical liberals. I have a lot of friends who are on the left classically that are, including on federal bench, state bench, in all kinds of positions of power. But the new generation of left-leaning lawyers doesn't believe in the four core principles. They believe, hey, what outcomes should we have here? Let's manipulate the situation to get there. Some of them will be honest and say it that way. Some of it you can just see from how they handle things because when I was in law school, that's how they were teaching us. They were teaching us to how do I manipulate the law to get to an ending? Now, they did it carefully, but they did it in like first-year legal writing classes where the right answer was you wanted to I'll give you an example. What happened in that case was in the first year law class, first semester, first year. So I'm there. They give us a test project where what we're supposed to do is to be an associate from we're supposed to imagine that we're an associate in a corporate law firm or any law firm. And the partner of the law firm has asked us, tell me what the law is in Wisconsin on this particular question. And it was whether adult disabled children should be able to recover for loss of consortium when there's an injury to the parent. And I researched the law. The law was clear. The law was clear that for a lot of dumb reasons, but because the fact they used to only value children based on their labor value, there's a lot of horrific things you find out about the law when you study its history. But in Wisconsin, you couldn't. If the adult, even if the adult was disabled, you couldn't recover for lost consortium. But I kept getting bad grades, and I was like, what? And I dug in, and it turns out they had written a template of the correct answer, and the correct answer was to pretend the law wasn't what it was, to just manipulate quotes from different parts of it and pretend that it actually already supported this outcome because the goal was your outcome is this. How do I manipulate the history of events and the history of law to pretend the law supports something it doesn't in fact support? And that's what's happening across the country. And so a lot of these clerks are really bad. So in federal court, I'm often battling the clerks, not the judge, unless the judge is an old school judge who doesn't care what the clerks think and does what they want. But any judge appointed in the last 20 years, and then some particular judges, Sullivan's been there for a long time, but there's some judges like Sullivan that have become very clerk dependent. And that's why I think Sullivan himself doesn't know often, he doesn't understand the legal basics. I mean, why do you think the guy's asking for somebody else to defend him in front of the Court of Appeals and asking somebody else to defend him in the trial court. I mean, it's like, hey, I'm a judge, but can somebody tell me what the law is on this? So I want to hire this guy to do it. What the heck?
If he didn't know before, he's going to know it now that he's got counsel. And then incidentally, it's an interesting thing. You're basically, you're describing the arguing towards a conclusion. Or arguing from a conclusion as opposed to towards one, which is, when someone's got their decision made up, that's how they do it. Now, Sakaki Onse asks, as Sullivan has hired counsel, can he plan to appeal the D.C. Circuit's opinion, 99.765 against him, in order to extend Flynn's torture? So that was one of the questions I had. So Sullivan, for anybody who doesn't know, has mandated counsel to represent his interests in responding to the Court of Appeals directive that he explained himself in adjudicating on the Flynn case. So you have a judge now who's got counsel to represent his own interests in the case where he's supposed to be representing the objective interests of justice. It's mind-blowing. But
I've never seen it. I've never seen a judge ask an amicus at a district court level to say, please tell me what the law is and if I can somehow use my power to hit this guy. And then, least of all, on a mandamus, go out and hire separate counsel using, I assume, governmental resources.
That was the other question. Who pays for this?
I assume it's going to be government resources.
It's a high profile. From what I understand, the lawyer representing him now, or prospectively representing him, represented Kavanaugh during the hearings.
Yes.
Who pays for this?
Exactly. I'm assuming it's going to be coming out of the judiciary chamber. So all of this is highly unusual. To the question of whether a judge can appeal to the Supreme Court, traditionally, yes. A judge can challenge a writ from the Court of Appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court. But having private counsel involved, I've just never seen this before. So, and other people are like, what exactly? It just shows how nuts he is. Well, and in my view, how lack of confidence. See, what it really tells everybody is, hey, by the way, I have no confidence in what I'm doing. Because the Court of Appeals is like, why do you need you're a federal judge. We're asking you what you did is right. You tell us why what you did is right. Don't go hire some other lawyer to tell us why you did was right.
To me, it doesn't signal a lack of confidence. It signal, and I'm not trying to judge Sullivan. I'm not trying to judge Sullivan. To me, it signifies a total lack of honesty because he doesn't want to lie for himself. So get a counsel to come in and present the story so he can say, it's, that's my counsel representing me. But the idea, imagine in every motion for recusal, the judge, the recusal of which is being sought, seeks counsel to represent them as to why they shouldn't be recused. It's mind-blowing in the most. This is jaw-dropping, rubbernecking from from the pedestrian perspective. But meanwhile, Flynn is still stuck in here. How much longer? We're going to get to that. How much longer is it going to drag this out for him? Does Sullivan hiring a criminal defense attorney signal he knows he broke some laws during the trial? Maybe some ex parte convos with Obama officials.
He doesn't think that way. My view of Sullivan, as soon as he issued that first order, my view was of what I'd heard about him. I've never practiced in front of him. It's just from other people that I talked to when I was looking at taking the case, is that he's just arrogant. So he's not going to think he did anything wrong. He's just looking at, okay, I need some political weight and I need some independent, smart lawyers to defend me in ways that I'm not going to be good enough. And I don't trust my clerks to be good enough to defend me. That's what he's doing. And so a judge like Sullivan, it tells you how accustomed to power he's been, that he thought he could get away with this even in the first place. And then he treats it like he's running a private law firm. Oh, okay, I'll hire these people out of the government treasury, these people out of the government treasury. If people think he hasn't done some other abuse of power in some other context, I think they would be mistaken given this course of behavior. But that's my take on him. No, he doesn't think he did anything wrong at all. I guarantee. Being in front of judges like that, they won't think they did anything. They're like those prosecutors on those innocence shows where they prove the guy's innocent, with DNA evidence and the rest. And they ask the prosecutor 20 years later, he's like, nah, he was still guilty. And it's like, oh, okay, how can you not recognize, it's that mindset. They're people that are not self-reflective. No,
it's amazing. And I definitely tend to think you're right. And so a lot of people have been asking this question, Joshua Cornelius, what kind of accountability, if any, does Sullivan and other corrupt judges, well, I'll rephrase the question in an objective manner, without judgment, Joshua, because I know other people are phrasing it this way. What accountability? My assessment, tell me if I'm right or wrong, minimal to none, other than an embarrassing Court of Appeal decision.
Well, you could be Alcee Hastings, a judge from the Southern District of Florida, find yourself impeached and subject to potential criminal cases because you took bribes, and you might end up becoming a congressman as he is today. So that gives you the kind of consequence that happens. In the federal side, very rare. There's two things that can happen. they can ethically suspend him from the bench. The D.C. Circuit has that authority. There's some constitutional questions about the scope of it, but they've done it to Manny Real in L.A. before. They've done it to a judge in Texas. I've unfortunately had to deal with both of those judges. Not pleasant. A smart lawyer some years ago figured out that if he could get Manny Real recused from every case, he would be in great business because of how many people hated Manny. So he flipped him off in court. He actually somehow got away with that. And now, of course, Manny has to recuse himself on all of his cases. That lawyer's business, boom. But the sad reality is that most judges face three legal consequences can happen. One is they can be suspended for ethical reasons by the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court.
Which is never going to happen in this case.
Yeah, no, not in this case, not at all. They only do that in the most crazy cases or where the judge is on the side of the outsider and is messing with the establishment. So if they're upsetting prosecutors, upsetting big corporate lawyers, then they face sometimes that consequence. But otherwise, they have to be completely off their rocker. There was a judge, a case that had just come back from anger management training. He kept reminding me of that when he was in front of me. He's like, okay, I got to calm down. Anger management. So, that's the reality of it. Second is he can be impeached. Congress can impeach a judge. But there's nothing here that I consider that is grounds for impeachment. Professional screw-ups are not impeachment, in my view. And then for a judge or any other official. Now, the impeachment standard for judges is broader than it is for the president, but I still don't see that happening. And some smart Republican congressman will probably bring it up if Sullivan gets reversed to just get some political attention. No, Congress almost never takes action, except when something drastic happens, like number 3, which is the Department of Justice can investigate if a crime did take place, and so they have prosecuted judges. But that's not going to happen here either.
Well, I was going to say, give me one example where they prosecuted a judge. I suspect it's going to be on something more serious than a questionable overreach in a case.
Only for crimes. And one of the great impeachment cases, of course, was U.S. v. Nixon, a judge. I think he was from the great state of Mississippi, who appealed his impeachment because he wanted to stay a judge while he was in federal prison. So so you have some unique unique mindsets out there.
This is what they're going to get angry at the lawyers for saying that, zero that's going to happen.
It's just a reality. More advocacy in the court of public opinion for political change, for judges to be held more responsible, I think is a good idea.
That works when the judges are elected, but not when they're appointed for life. So the only thing.
Yeah, correct. I think that, I go back and forth on it because here's what I view. I believe you should have a right of first recusal that's a peremptory challenge, like in some state courts that exist. You should have that in federal courts, so that if a judge is particularly AWOL all the time, people can just immediately disqualify them from their case without having to meet a ridiculous standard that almost nobody can meet these days.
No, I'm going to bring this comment back up, but I say, like, in Quebec, we all know that we've had, let's just say, 1 to 3 judges who were so over the top. But there's nothing you can do about it. Like, barring them committing an actual crime or being pulled over for DUI, like, it's not going to happen. So nothing's going to happen. He'll get an embarrassing decision from the Court of Appeal. Maybe he'll get internally reprimanded for wasting government resources, but we'll never know about it. The decision will be returned, or he undoes it himself. Nothing's going to happen. It's going to piss people off. But
exactly. Well, the only other change that I've recommended to people is the licensing of lawyers. Now, I have a contrarian perspective. I think I'm not for licensing of law. I think anyone should be able to practice law without a license. I don't think there should be a licensing requirement because I don't trust the gentlemen of the bar to meaningfully supervise it. And I think it arbitrarily limits the number of lawyers in the world, which undermines legal access for poor and working class people across the country. But putting that aside, at a minimum, we should not have one branch of government control whether you get licensed, the enforcement of that license, and the adjudication of that license. The legislative branch has no role in our licensing. The executive branch has no role in enforcement. Judiciary branch gets to control all 3. And who's going to witness more misconduct about judges that are a problem than lawyers? But right now, as a kid lawyer, I had dealt with a case where a judge kept falling asleep through trials. And he ended up in one case giving a kid who described in detail how he was being abused back to the abusive parent because he'd fallen asleep through half the trial. And I wasn't in for that part of the trial, but I heard from the lawyer about it, and I was like, "Why don't we do something about it?" And the lawyer I worked for is an old school guy, been around a long time. He said, "Real simple, Bob. If you raise a question about that judge, you're going to antagonize every judge in this area, and we're never going to win a case again." And I was like, "That's a problem."
Yeah.
And from that point forward, I decided I'm never going to be locked into any local community where I practice to where they can use that against me. And I've not been bashful at questioning judges. They haven't been bashful about telling me what they'll do to me either. Couple of threats of contempt in prison and whatnot. But it's a major problem. We should not have a system. We're supposed to have separation of powers for a reason. The one place where we have no separation of powers at all is the regulation of lawyers, and they're the ones who would expose judicial misconduct more than anybody. And they're given a strong deterrent from doing so.
That's very interesting. You're right. I mean, bottom line, you're right. I agree. Or bottom line, I agree with you. Tony Niev says, best case scenario, Sullivan is doing this to make the dismissal of Flynn's case rock solid, but perhaps I'm putting too much faith in judiciary. So that's one side of viewing. The other side is he's doing this to compel Trump to pardon Flynn, to make it a political issue, as opposed to having Flynn be exonerated by the DOJ dropping the charges.
Exactly. And Sullivan operates in a certain echo chamber. There's a lot of it's fascinating to watch. Like, I think all the Q phenomenon as well. It's a lot of and it relates to something related to Joe Rogan recently. There's a lot of people who have a deep belief. They need to believe that the elected president of the United States is in actual control of the system. They need to believe that the judiciary operates with integrity, as that person was talking about, the reason for their belief. And if you're Joe Rogan, you need to believe that YouTube and Twitter are not just Big Brother Orwellian censors, but are just misguided, trying to control a difficult, chaotic environment. And the problem with that is it's just not likely to explain the course of behavior or to predict their near short-term future behavior. But I understand. I've been trying to explain to people that get agitated about Q is it's like, look, these are people who want to believe in the system down deep. And the idea that they could elect a president and he have almost no control over large parts of the executive branch of the United States, including foreign relations. It's like, actually, that's been reality for some time. A functional bureaucracy takes over. That's what deep state was just a term for the dual state that economists and political scientists were describing more than a century ago. And so it's the nature of it, but it's because they want to believe leads them to come up with storylines that have, it sort of like goes back to the Arbery case. I think both sides want to look for facts that support their priors and filter information that way. Jurors do this all the time. I mean, I had a case where the jury was against me from the get-go. I didn't know that until late. Ultimately, got a nice settlement, praise God. But because the other side wasn't fully aware of how much I was screwed. The juror, even afterwards, really liked me. Wanted to explain herself and wanted to justify what she did. She didn't want to let me down. She's like, I just had to follow the facts. And what was fascinating is she pointed out, she said, I really would have liked to have known this fact. And it was a fact that I talked about approximately 100 times during that trial. So but because the way the mind works, the reason why confessions are so unreliable, eyewitness testimony is so unreliable. The mind tends to, another example is manic gamblers. The way gamblers operate, the reason why they become manic gamblers, addictive gamblers, is they remember all their wins and blank out they have a memento memory from the movie. They blank out all of the losses. The same is true of any storyline. So people will come in and they will remember the certain facts and completely ignore facts that contradicted their opinion. They'll effectively pretend those facts don't exist. And in their conscious memory, they will have no recall of that fact. And it's the way the psychology works. It's how motivation is the master of reason. And so I think that's why people want to believe that there's a positive intention behind Judge Sullivan's conduct. My view, nope, he's just an arrogant guy used to getting away with what he wanted. And this time he got caught. Now, here's the thing. If he'd got a different panel, if it was 2 Obama judges on that panel, I bet they don't issue a writ. And they say, forget it. He was gambling and he lost. But he's not. I don't think he's strategically brilliant enough to see this all coming. He was like, "I got the power. Let's see what happens."
I based on the prior conduct in that file, I would never assume that Sullivan was trying to help Trump. I would have just assumed he's trying to coax Trump into a political pardon, so that everybody could say, "Look, Flynn was never exonerated by the charges being dropped. It was a political pardon." much in the same way they're going to say that the motion to dismiss the charges was itself politically motivated based on, forget the guy's name who drafted it, but a political appointee. It's an interesting thing. Matthew Chris says, an attorney violates the rules of professional conduct, sanction him. 100%. Done. Judge violates judicial ethics, crickets. It's there's a thin blue line in the legal profession. I think every lawyer really understands it and appreciates it. It's not...
And it depends on who you are, too. If you're an attorney for the prosecution, they track the case where even where judges found prosecutorial misconduct, the odds of them facing any ethical sanction was less than 1 in 1,000 in the United States. So now if you're a defense lawyer or you're a controversial lawyer, if you do the kind of work I do, you get put under microscopic scrutiny every other day. But if you're on the prosecutorial side of the aisle, if you're on the corporate law firm side of the aisle, if you're on the power side of the aisle, you often won't face consequences. It's the people who control the system, sometimes intentionally, sometimes just because they're a part of the culture, that they see those lawyers as the right kind of lawyers. Jerry Spence used to say the gentlemen of the bar are always the gentlemen of the bar. And what he meant by that was they're the top hat Wall Street crowd. Not the kind that's why you look at who gets sanctioned. Overwhelmingly defense lawyers, family lawyers, low-level street lawyers. Are you telling me that there's not a bunch of prosecutors that have done wrong that somehow they never get sanctioned? So in all likelihood, it's who you are that gets the consequences as a lawyer and who you represent, rather than whether who's actually violating the ethical rules, in my view.
I don't think anybody who's been watching the news since 2016 would even dare to disagree with that. It's just it's now the only problem now is it's what's become good politics, or what's become like standard politics is effectively institutionalized corruption. But totally broader question. Joshua Cornelius wants to know, how many haircuts did Barnes get during lockdown? How many illegal haircuts did Barnes get during shutdown? Yeah.
My little sister did this one, so it was only quasi illegal. But there was actually it was fascinating. People were telling me, "Oh, I got a barber. I can get it." I was like, "We're actually talking about barbers like they're black market goods."
Barbers.
It's insane. Black market hair salons. I mean, there's like memes going around where a guy's pulling up on a corner, the hooker's out there, and she's like, "What do you want?" He's like, "I really need a barber. Can you get me a barber?" No longer drugs, no longer prostitution, no longer alcohol. The new vice that's prohibited is hair salon people sneaking into people's houses. It's like, this is nuts.
Leave it to the government to create a black market for something that shouldn't. I mean, it's and the thing is, it's no more of a black market than any other black market. It's like, it's literally the government has criminalized normal conduct without getting too much.
Well, they themselves seem to have not gone without a hair salon or a barber.
Cake Tapper, all the boys. Whitmer, her hair is looking perfect these days. I know what my mother's hair looks like. My dad colored my mom's hair. It was weird. We got Captain Putz says, my 2 bits for shark food. Thank you very much, Captain Putz. I like the Captain Putz name. So the Flynn, I don't think there's any more questions in Flynn. That really answers where we're going with this. It's crazy. Let's see if we can do very quickly Elon Musk, because I don't think we're going to have many questions on it, but I do have questions myself. Let me just get these. Courtney Gray says, Jonathan Haydout's righteous mind is about moral reason. Yeah, moral reason. Morality is a very subjective term, unfortunately, which is, Joshua Cornelius, it's possible to not become a hopeless cynic as a law professor in the U.S. federal legal system, considering the rampant sin. Oh, hold on. It's possible to not become a hopeless cynic as a law professor in the U.S. federal legal system, considering the rampant cynical practices of corruption. I don't know. The older I get, the more cynical I get, and I have to struggle with my wife and everyone around me to not get angry about it.
It's fascinating. I mean, I see it sort of as skepticism, but my first introduction to that was I had a conversation with a friend of mine from law school who was going to be the associate on the Enron case, and defending Jeff Skilling. And the head of that counsel I thought was incompetent, but I thought she had skill as opposed to the main Skilling lawyer. And I laid out to her what she could see. This was very early on in the case. Like, okay, here's what's going to happen. Boom, 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 boom. And at the end of it, she was like, "Oh my goodness, you're so cynical." And I was like, "No, it's not cynicism. It's just I'm going to predict for you what's going to happen." And by the end of it, because she'd gone in idealistic, she became so skeptical, so cynical, she left the law firm and criminal defense altogether. And it was, so my view is I'm not really cynical. I see it as realistic. It's the old school of legal realism, the 1920s, 1930s, who famously said, sometimes a judge made a decision based on what he had for breakfast that morning. That was their point about, dealing with, we're governed by humans, not really by law. That's a mythology built up around them.
Well, the old expression, justice is human. It's
Yes.
the judge goes in. The breakfast was always, my dad told me that expression as well, but it's the old, justice is human is the broader one. Like they all go with the music they have in the back of their head whenever they hear a tune, so they interpret it accordingly.
Exactly.
And not a question of being a cynic, but it's like you're not a cynic because you say if I put an injured minnow in open water, it's going to get eaten by a pike. You're a realist, and
Exactly.
Humans have as much predatory behavior as animals in the wild, and
And the way I describe the counterpoint is the resistance to bad people is always good people. So the best way to deal with is the natural cynicism that can occur is that good things still happen in the justice system. There's a good documentary and some good interviews on Vlad TV with Freeway Ricky Ross, who he went into prison illiterate, taught himself how to read, taught himself law books, and was originally sentenced to life imprisonment. Got the Ninth Circuit to reverse and release him. And so if Freeway Ricky can go from being an illiterate prisoner to a free man, that tells you the legal system sometimes can prevail. The fact the odds are stacked against you doesn't mean it's a 0% chance.
Okay, fair enough. I have a cynical, skeptical response to that, but I'm going to keep it to myself actually because I don't want to impart my cynicism. It might be very temporally limited. Tony Nieves says, how much would it cost to defend Martin Shkreli? So I don't know the facts of that story, but I understand that there might be more to that story than I thought I understood based on the media coverage, which knowing the way media covers stuff today, I wouldn't think it's impossible. Do you want to venture into it in a quick answer?
I only know a little bit about it. So I would have that same instinct that I know he got a bad rap. I know that the media coverage was intensely negative. I know Cassandra Fairbanks, who covers a lot of independent, eclectic personalities politically and otherwise, says that he got a bad rap, and she generally has a good read on things. So, I would definitely look at his case. If I liked his case, then I would take it. There's some people I've represented that I really did not like, but I thought the legal principle I was advancing was important. But generally, I avoid. I'm in a privileged position where I can usually avoid. If I don't like somebody, I just don't represent them. And there's certain things I've told people. If I think you're guilty of certain things, I'm out of your case. So but not all lawyers have that liberty. It wouldn't surprise me if he's been misrepresented. I know, the guy they accused of being the Dread Pirate Roberts that set up that so-called illegal deep dark website. A friend of mine, Joshua Draytell, represented him, and other people have told me they're very convinced he was innocent. So there's a lot when you dig into most cases, whatever the media's impression of a case is, turns out to be wrong more often than right.
Yeah, I mean, and that's not a question of being cynical. That's just knowing the way media is, and we've seen it for the last 5 years. I look back at things 20 years ago and ask the same questions now in retrospect. Vox Romantic says a small fee to buy one of those little plastic caps for the sharp objects. That opener is on my roof. I never want to see it. It may get struck by lightning without burning the house down. Okay, so let's see what we got here. We're gonna hold on. I just saw something. Excuse me. Small fee. We got Joshua Cornelius says, Viva and Barnes, thanks for being good people. I'm off to Denver. Deliver in Seattle. Josh, sleep well. Drive safely. Kelly Graham says, love the live stream with Robert Barnes. Wish YouTube notifications work. Keep up the great work. YouTube, first of all, Kelly, thank you very much for the super chat. And yeah, the YouTube notifications, depending on the subject matter, are more or less efficient. Oh, and says we got Joshua Cornelius says Viva Barnes. Thanks. Okay, we got that one. So one quick one, actually, before we do this, because I think Elon Musk. Okay, very quickly. I don't think we have much to talk about Elon Musk right now, except one thing that I'm curious about: the basis of the lawsuit. The basis of the lawsuit is that you have counties in California imposing stricter orders than the statewide orders. I mean, I think I understand it, but I understand that I don't know very much about it. I mean, can you elaborate and like clarify for the the layperson like me?
For the legal interpret, to me, that should not be that consequential, but it is for political reasons. So legally, there should not be a big, if a particular county believes their particular outbreak risks justify their particular shutdown in ways that maybe the state doesn't need for the whole state. I don't see why legally that should change the analysis of whether a particular lockdown order is constitutionally correct or not. However, I can see how it influences judges. So judges are looking at it saying, well, okay, if you're doing something that's a lot different than the state, or you're doing a lot different than the country, then I'm not going to necessarily believe this is so emergency justified as you claim it is. Because in all of these cases, I've dealt with it. I think I have 5 or 6 cases pending. I have several more that we're looking at filing, several more where we're trying to negotiate with the governor or the mayor to get the right outcome. It's all politics, what's happening in the courts. It's all a draw. If I get a court that really is a old school constitutionalist, left or right, I'm in business. If I get a court that's like, I don't want to get involved in the middle of an emergency, maybe a bunch of people will die because I issue this order. That kind of judge I have zero chance with. And I'm just waiting for the Court of Appeals 2 years from now. So I think politically is why the difference is being made. Politically, courts are saying, well, the governor didn't issue this order, president didn't issue this order. So what's your grounds for you, county so-and-so, to do this to this big, important business like Tesla? So I think it's politics that's governing a lot of these decisions. I think they settled with them pretty quick. It didn't take Elon Musk long to say, well, heck, I'm just hopping out of here to Texas for them to be, hold on a second. Maybe we don't need to shut down Tesla's factory after all. But only people with that kind of political weight, like in Nevada, is pitiful. The governor went off and took a vacation up to Montana for the whole weekend because all he's really waiting for is the gaming commission, because they're mostly governed by the casinos. It's supposed to be governing the casinos, but you could put a big asterisk by that. Just watch the movie from Robert De Niro. You'll get a sense for how those things work. And that's what's driving things, in my view. Legally, I don't see why there would be a big difference between a city, county, or state reaction. But judges I think politically are saying, okay, if the governor isn't saying you have to do this, then I'm not going to let you, mayor, county executive, sheriff, get away with it.
Okay, but now, so the one thing I'm trying to understand always is they talk about the separation of powers, the legislative branch, and the power to create criminal infractions, and how that. So, on how does what is the county's authority to create criminal infractions, or are these all statutory crimes?
All of that usually would be state driven, but it's technically in the United States, most state governments are formed. The local government is in effect a branch of the state government that's created and chartered to give in certain power and authority. And they usually have the power and authority to issue their own emergency orders, but it can vary. So you have some cities and counties that have more limits on them than the state does, for example. Or in some contexts, the city and county can be simply enforcing state law where they could not pass it in their own city or county to do so. So that's where a lot of the differences of opinion are taking place. And of course, you also have cities and counties suing the state in California. So things are getting crazy.
Okay, so that's interesting. But I'm trying to understand. I mean, I guess in Canada, it's a different system. You have your federal criminal law, then you have your provincial statutory laws. In California or in the States, you have your federal crimes, you have your
state crimes. There's almost there will be some local laws, but very few. So usually they're like disorderly conduct. They may have specific statutes to a specific city. So like I've sued Milwaukee over their disorderly conduct statute because it's too broad and how it's being applied. Got a cop to admit that. Unfortunately, he didn't realize what he was admitting. But so that's there are city specific ordinances is what they're usually called at the city or county level that can have a criminal enforcement component, and that you'd go to city court. So an old buddy of mine is the city court judge back home in my hometown, Chattanooga. Great guy, old school guy. He actually he lost his license, convicted of a federal crime, came back out, got relicensed. Now he's a city judge, and he's a guy who deserved it. Real compassionate, good person. But all he does is enforce city ordinances, which do have a criminal component in some cases.
Even potentially imprisonment.
Yeah. But usually it's the city jail, and the usual protocol is it has to be like a year or less, something like that. So it's that kind of thing.
I'm going to ask you a very leading question right now. You have no insider knowledge of the Tesla lawsuit, I presume?
I have no inside knowledge at all. I just read the suit and then saw state folded within.
Knowing that I'm not getting you in trouble, then did Robert just effectively state that he knows Tesla is going to Texas, not Oklahoma? Is this public knowledge, or did he just open up insider trading?
No, I have no personal knowledge. Elon Musk said so. Now, Elon's been on a red pill wave, according to his own definition of late. But I know people who invest in Tesla, and know other people who just monitor him. I don't have any inside information. Don't represent Elon, but I know people who know him. And that's broad scale. Joe Rogan publicly talked about him moving to Austin, Texas. Other people have talked about moving out of California. I got a bunch of friends that are in the Hollywood business out there. Friend that owns a big restaurant, owns apartment buildings out there. They're all going stir crazy. So, and most of them lean right, but a lot of them are more, a few of them are center. Some of them even have leftist inclinations. They're all, they just can't understand what the mayor of LA is doing. Can't really understand what the governor's doing. I mean, right now in America, I think in New York, you can go to the beach, but not swim. In California, you can only go to the beach if you swim. It's like, these are obviously live Milgram experiments on our brain at some point. This is no longer science or medicine justifying this.
And I saw the tweet that you commented on about the pool in the Ozarks, and people in an outdoor pools, in a chlorinated pool, broad daylight under UV sun, like
with humidity that time of year.
30. Sorry, it's no, it is. I don't want to be dramatic about it. I don't want to call it psychological abuse, but I know a lot of people out there are going to call it psychological abuse. Having Dr. Fauci come out now and say there's concrete evidence about lasting effects of long-term lockdowns, like that's I wanted to make a joke, a cynical joke, like the Billy Madison, like things you could have brought to my attention yesterday, except we all knew this. Why do you say this after 3 months of lockdown? It really seems, I don't want to be too cynical. It seems illogical giving the best benefit of the doubt, and it seems abusive giving the most cynical interpretation.
Exactly. And the way I compare it to people is there's a guy who wrote a great book on conspiracy theories. And he says most people who question conspiracy theories or want to label something a conspiracy theory do so because they have a irrational deference to people in power. That was his explanation. He's like, often what he saw was their basis for it. If you look at the history of human experimentation by governments around the world, this would be small scale by comparison. It's not like we're given treatment for syphilis and lied to like the Tuskegee folks were for about 30 years. That experiment went on before they finally stopped it because somebody leaked the news of it, or any of the other. I mean, in Vegas, they used to invite people out to watch the nuclear bombs go off. And they told Eisenhower, by the way, this is obviously going to contaminate a lot of the people that were telling to, hey, come to Vegas and watch the radioactive material. He said, keep it quiet. Don't tell them it's any danger. And that's one of our better presidents who told them that. There are people who are doing radioactive pills in Rochester where they were giving people radioactive materials, thinking that, and the person thought they were getting treatment when in fact they're just subjects of human experimentation. So there's a long history of that in the United States as well as the rest of the world. So the idea that some people would say, hey, I would be kind of curious to see how much we can get away with politically, how much can we form mass behavior in a certain way. I would not put it past certain people in positions of power to see this as a useful, interesting social experiment, thinking it's no harm, no foul, sort of like the Milgram experiment was.
Amazing. It's amazing. And okay, I think maybe now we're about an hour and 45 minutes in. I think we covered the three subjects. Let's give it 1 minute more for any questions I may have missed. If I missed super chats, I apologize. Robert, it's phenomenally fascinating. The Arbery case, I think I can accept that I've come to my conclusions, and it would take something radically different to shape my mind. And maybe it is a moral sort of ethical analysis of the existing law, or something else. I can appreciate that. Flynn, I cannot understand how people can tolerate this and justify it in any means, but for the most fervent political agendas that people have, and what they will tolerate based on their political ideologies. And the Elon Musk, it's interesting. I thought the determinant factor would have been what the counties can impose based on what the statewide policies are. But if not, I mean, now it's sort of it makes sort of sense that county can enact whatever. What is the extent of the criminal penalties that counties can enforce before they become unconstitutional or breach the separation of powers? Like, what's that limit?
Usually it's just a matter of whatever the authority to form a municipality or county recognized government is, which is varies from state to state. Typically, the city ordinances will only be misdemeanor offenses of less than 12 months in a day. But it's not always required that they do that under their municipal charter ordinances.
Okay. And it says, I want to see someone says something. How about Cuomo's torture interpretation of justifying sending COVID nurses?
You know, it's amazing. I have several people that are potential plaintiffs. They probably are not going to be able to get legal relief because they're doing a circle of liability coverage, where if the politician ordered it, then they're saying they relied upon other people for it, and that you can't sue them for it because it didn't rise to sufficiently outrageous conduct. And then they're now immunizing nursing homes all across the country. So and this is what nursing homes, I suspect, guessed all along. They're like, okay, we can do the cheapest possible thing, take these people, not really do any ventilation, not really care for them at all. That's how you get something crazy like somebody beating up an old person, as happened in that viral video. And the nursing home knew nobody's going to sue us because we're going to get immunity on the back end. There was probably that implicit quid pro quo from the inception. Now, the more cynical people out there will take note that Bill Gates has been a supporter of death panels, that some of the people pushing some of the shutdown policies support death panels, that think we spend too much money protecting elderly at the end of life. Gates is on record saying that. He probably regrets being on record saying that. He almost regretted it 2 seconds after he said it, but he wanted to broach the subject, of course. He couldn't help himself. And some people are going to say this was deliberate, that this was putting in effective death panels that saved a lot of government money in many cases, goes to those nursing home patients because they died sooner. So that's the conspiratorial version of events. I'm not necessarily there, but what I do believe is that people who were in a position to know better deliberately took actions that they should have known at least was going to cause untimely deaths of people who are the most vulnerable.
No, and we, you and I messaged it to you privately, but like in Montreal, we weren't. I don't know that we were sending people home from hospitals who were COVID positive, but our nursing homes, our old people, they call them long-term healthcare facilities here, were depleted of personal protective equipment before this all even took place. And even the ones that had PPE, it was shipped to the hospital so that these old persons' homes were left with nothing. And lo and behold, in Montreal, we have 2,500 deaths. 85%, well, without exaggerating, 80 to 85% are in old persons' homes. In Canada, the latest stat was 79 to 80% of all the fatalities were linked to old persons' homes. So either old persons' homes, people there, or staff who go around and subsequently spread. It's it is the frustrating thing where you talk about the fractal wrongness of the government's decisions to lock everybody down as opposed to locking the most vulnerable down. And you try not to get cynical and frustrated and jaded and whatever. But I have a grandmother-in-law who is at an unnamed home, and it takes me sending lawyer letters to make sure that they get treatment, knowing that they're under the scrutiny of potential lawsuits, and that's what it takes. And barring that, it's without consequence, it's without sanctions, and it's without consequence for the government officials who just we took a sledgehammer to society and didn't take the chisel to the area that needed it.
Exactly. And the fact that they guaranteed him immunity, it's my same issue with the vaccine solution to COVID-19 is I've never liked the immunity given to vaccine companies. It's like most of the people labeled anti-vax, and they're mostly mislabeled because 90% of them are not anti-vax. They have questions about specific vaccines. Is why did we remove this from our jury trial system of responsibility and accountability? Because we immunize them completely. And I've always had a problem when somebody says, oh, they're 100% safe. I'm like, okay, then we definitely we can lift the immunity without a problem, right? Because the only reason to make them immune is if they have a serious problem.
Any problem. If they have a risk, don't.
Exactly. What's amazing, it's like the reason why when I looked into this years ago, I was like, well, I thought I could bring an informed consent suit, because what happened is they did not tell the parent about any of the risk from the particular vaccine. And it turned out that you can't sue for that either. You can't sue for anything. And it's like, well, that's not going to turn out. You can make a claim with what they call a vaccine court where the government pays money out of its resources. But that is a difficult, arduous process. Now, the fact they've issued $3 billion worth of damages over the past 20 years tells you there's something going on there. But even to get any money out of that is a difficult process. So and you don't have a jury trial, you don't have a judge, you don't have an Article 3 judge. You have people the government is always stingy with money when it's their cash. So even if they printed it from the Fed like they're doing these days, it's problematic. But the fact they're going to immunize all these nursing homes, I consider that the bigger scandal. Because if we could sue these nursing homes, at least we could get to the truth of what happened, give them a deterrent from doing it again, so on and so forth. But if they're going to immunize them all, we're never going to know what happened and never get accountability at all.
It's terrible. Okay, and I'm gonna end it with these two super chats because Joel Rowley, and I'm taking a picture of it. I think I took it before, but just in case.
Wow.
One of my kids has texted me 11 times from my wife's phone. Please look at the New Mexico SWAT serving warrant on sheriff, then arresting him for obstructing. It's what the warrant demands. That's interesting. Plus all the okay. I've screenshot it. I'm going to look into it, and maybe we're going to do a separate stream on this later on. Joel, thank you very much. And there was one more that I saw before we call this to the end. I skipped over. Bobcat says, "Can we talk about Ross Ublich's case was mishandled sometime? It would be interesting to know." Okay.
That's the case I briefly mentioned. That's the guy they considered the Dread Pirate Roberts. That was the nickname, the moniker. And I'm blanking currently on the site. It's the first dark web site that basically created a libertarian-style delivery mechanism of illegal products. And he was the one that Joshua Draytel represented, my friend from New York. And he was convicted. His mother says he's innocent. When I reviewed the case, I thought there were serious flaws in the evidentiary presentation by the government. Because of what happened in the court of public opinion against him, the judge ended up, I thought, making bad rulings in the case and was overtly and unduly hostile to his position from an evidence and legal perspective. There's definitely evidence of government misconduct in the case. There's agents who are doing all kinds of things they weren't supposed to be doing. So there was also an IRS agent involved. And I knew if there's an IRS agent involved, 80% chance somebody did something bad. That's just because that's their nature. They're either dumb or criminal. They can't help themselves. That comes from a lifetime of experience in those cases. So I think there's good justification to relook at that case. There are people that think President Trump should commute his sentence or consider a pardon because of evidentiary questions. But the big question is maybe they either deliberately or accidentally put in prison the wrong man, that he isn't the guy they said he was. And there's good reasons to believe that. Like they accused him of a bunch of stuff that turned out they even admitted wasn't true. But mainly the way they caught him was strong evidence that he could not be the person they thought he was. Because if he was the person they thought he was, the evidence they had, they would never have had. So that's where I have problems. I have doubts about his conviction.
Okay, when I hear my wife coming on, this might have to be the last one. King Couture says, Barnes, you're not updated on vaccines. A few years ago, they closed the loopholes for lawsuits if they knowingly served a vaccine that caused death or harm is no longer possible. It was closed a few years ago.
My understanding is that most vaccines are still immune. There are some that you can sue over, but most you cannot. Okay. That's my understanding. And that's definitely going to be true in the COVID context because the feds are issuing broad-scale immunities in a wide range of contexts for this.
Okay. And now, Robert, let's do this. Everybody, I heard someone open a door and close it in a very menacing way. Everybody, thank you very much. If I missed super chats, I apologize. As always, thank you for coming in. Thank you for tuning in. I'm going to tune out the broadcast. I'm going to say goodnight to Robert and thank him as always, as I do after we've left the broadcast. Everybody, stay well. Stay, I say focused. Stay optimistic, but it's easy to say and not necessarily easy to feel. But we'll do this again sooner than later. I'll see you on the webs, everybody, and be well and broadcast.